and then over for our break for tea. So what I'm going to do is, I'm sure you've heard everything else. Let me do a quick sort of teaser on takeaways. I'm not going to spend much time on it. And then from there, I'll open just for, not questions at all. If there's anything that people thought we had some kind of blind spot, or we may have missed something, but just flag it out quickly, not a speech, nothing, because we need to take a break and move to the next session very quickly. One thing I find very important to me is the imperative nexus between water, what I like to call dwellings instead of slums, and then people. This is an imperative. In other words, how do you make the relationship between people, the places where they are, the geography, the space, the location, mobility, and everything else, and then the resources they're using? And one of them for us is obviously water at this stage. But also, the place where we are has become now a commodity. We sell, trade, we move around, we think, hey, this is where I used to live. You might like this place. How much do you have? And you pay for it, and so forth. So that deals with a couple of other things. So around people, water, and then where they live, which means slums, there is the idea of the, if you want, the politics of it, that many of you mentioned. And then in the politics, you also have the idea of governance. How do you make sure the notion of taking action is followed by actions that can really make those things happen for the better, for a much larger group of people? We also assume the nature of the power relations between those who have, those who are already in charge, and those who do not have, and those who are not in charge largely, to deal with our resources. Which means simply the economics of water, the politics of water around it, but of course what is also important is the notion of justice that's coming up. And justice does have a cost, social justice and everything else. How do you deal with all these contradictions, not just about today, but understand the brief history of the same thing human beings have been going through for millennia? So we are not the only one dealing with this. People have already. The only difference is that we are at a period where some of these accelerations, as many of you have said, are much faster. The role of technology, distance, that as you mentioned, from wherever it is here in Africa to Narita in Japan. Distances seem to be shrinking, and as well as having an impact on who we are, our identities, and the relationship with the identities and places and resources are now being challenged. But let's bring it back and be a bit more focused. Our focus is in a place called Northern Africa, largely, and of course the Middle East and also part of Africa. So when we break down and then we go where we are going to go to have a conversation, I'd like you to pay attention to all these very important notions. But most important, not being caught up in what I call the three, especially the two tyrannies. There are three tyrannies I talk about all the time. The first tyranny, pour ceux qui parlent en français, ce que j'appelle les trois tyrannies. La première tyrannie, c'est la tyrannie du passé. Et on en a parlé avec lui. La deuxième tyrannie, c'est la tyrannie du présent. So the first tyranny is the tyranny of the past. The second is the tyranny of the present. And then the third tyranny, sinon la troisième tyrannie, c'est celle du futur. The reason why I call them tyranny is that they really hold us so tight. The first tyranny is literally much more difficult because of the nature of our memories. Who we are is usually what we know. Yes. So the past is something that's already happened. And every time you ask people, they'll say, this is who I am, this is what my family, and so forth. We go and use what we call symbolically backwards. Now the challenge that I think this group, at least Lamia, Rio, and everybody else, and then Nisrim is putting out to all of us in this group is say, all right, while we'll be held by one tyranny, that of the past, and of course the urgencies of the present, we tend to forget a bit about what to come. In fact, we don't want to deal much with that. So I'm taking that challenge and I'm throwing it to all of you when you're going to go into groups. In fact, Rio is going to talk a little bit more about it and say, how do you stretch beyond the two tyrannies of the past and the present, and now start to perhaps embrace the tyranny of the future without forgetting those two tyrannies, because they are linked. You can't escape them. But the point for us is to be able to think about anticipatory elements of the tyranny of the future, to figure out better ways to improve the living conditions of people around those two issues: water, and then dwelling places we call slums, in a specific geographic location. That is really three of them: that Northern Africa, Middle East, and then Sub-Saharan Africa. So my challenge to you is, can we do that? Instead of perhaps focusing only on a brief history of just water and slums, can we start to look at this? So let me open very quickly, just for, I know it's a tight one, just 2 minutes, not more. Does anybody have something to add that we missed in terms of perhaps, if you want, we didn't pick, that we should have had? In my case, I would think, wanted to toss it out to Reham, I wanted to see a little bit more the tension between supply and demand of water, but most important, consumption patterns, because demand doesn't always imply consumption right away. Yes. And the other one is going to Geshe. One thing, not just Geshe, sorry, but people talk about slums, the idea of both mobility and then migration. I think these two are very, very important. When we're talking about water, geography becomes important. Where is water located? Can we have access to it? Can we move either towards it, or can it move towards us in one way or another? Yes. And of course, these two elements, or three, determines the ability of the costs, demand and supply, supply and demand, the usage of it, the consumption patterns, and so forth and so forth. So let me open it. If I don't hear anybody, we'll practice. One person, yes. Can you tell us quickly your name so that we remind people?
Okay. My name is Malika Busian.
Yes.
From Germany.
Yes. Thanks.
I have one point that came up into my mind when listening to the inputs about the slums, or dwellers, as we call it, is the question of citizenship and the right of living. From that what I heard, I had the impression that we are only talking about the citizens of a country, like Egyptians in Egypt or Moroccans in Morocco. But what happens to labor, to laborers coming from other countries? We have to take this also into consideration, because these people usually live in slums, especially when we have on the workers on the low economic level.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Just quickly your name, so at least.
Yeah, my name is Abbas Yunus, UAE. What came to, I think there's, given the prevalence of extremist ideologies and movements in the region now, and their very active recruitment strategies, I think the slums would probably be one of the first places you would look. So that's one issue.
Very important. Yes, sir.
Muhammad Halaika from Jordan. Thank you. I think from what we heard this morning, this is a clear manifestation of the failure of governments. And accountability is a crucial issue here. We are discussing the issue of water and slums, waiting for somebody to come up with a solution. And governments are very slow, and they have their own problems, bureaucracy, corruption, you name it. But I think we are missing the issue of empowering the people to act and get their rights. Participation of communities in development decisions. This is the first. My second point, there is an issue now in the Middle East countries which